Imagine, if you will, the slow awakening of a city that never truly sleeps, a city that was once the beating heart of an empire, a city whose name alone still echoes with power and myth. Roman, though you are listening from the distance of centuries, you may allow yourself to sink into its rhythm, not with haste, not with drama, but with a soft, measured cadence, a steady unfolding of detail, as if the past itself were an endless fabric unrolling before you, thread by thread, whisper by whisper, stone by stone, until you feel as though you are there, as though your own body has been placed gently into the early hours of a Roman morning, where the streets are cool beneath the lingering shadows of night, where the air is already laced with the faint mineral temps of water trickling from fountains, where the hush of expectation hangs low like a veil waiting to be lifted, and where you lie, still half asleep, behind wooden shutters that are cracked just slightly open, letting in a thin blade of pale light, enough to illuminate the texture of the wall, the worn grain of the wood, the soft outline of a clay jug resting against the floor, as if every small detail of this space were a quiet reminder that life in Rome, for all its grandeur, was always lived through the humble touch of ordinary things. Listen carefully now, not to me, but to the city itself, footsteps tapping on paving stones as the earliest risers stir, the slow scrape of a vendor adjusting his stall, the rustle of cloth as shutters are pulled wider, the faint nickering of a mule still drowsy from the night, the quiet murmur of two voices passing below your window, their words indistinct but their rhythm familiar, woven into the daily life of this place where repetition is not wearisome but anchoring, where the day begins not with spectacle but with the return of sounds that have always been and always will be the chorus of Rome at dawn. And among these sounds, like a constant, unassuming heartbeat, there is the sound of water flowing, dripping, spilling gently into stone basins, carried through channels and conduits, channeled from aqueducts that stretch across the horizon like monumental ribs of stone against the paling sky. Arches rising, arches falling, arches repeating, a rhythm of geometry that feels eternal, that feels as if it could hold up not just water, but the very order of the world. From a distance, these aqueducts are glorious testaments to the might of Roman engineering, those sweeping silhouettes that march across hills and valleys, asserting Rome's dominion not only over men but over nature itself, bending rivers to the will of the city. Yet from up close, from within the narrow confines of a street where carts rumble and voices rise, that grandeur dissolves into something more humble, more personal. For the water that passes in grand channels above is not truly alive until it reaches the fountain, until it spills into a trough, until it is scooped up by clay hands into clay vessels, until it is lifted, strained against a human back, and carried, step by slow step, through the labyrinth of streets, to where it is needed most. This is where the story of Rome narrows, where the arches of empire bend down to rest upon your own shoulders. For if you are to imagine yourself here, if you are to feel not only the sweep of Rome's greatness, but the weight of its survival, then you must take on the role of the water carrier, anonymous yet essential, ignored yet indispensable. A figure moving endlessly through the streets with the dull ache of labor pressing into your bones. A figure upon whose quiet endurance the shimmering facade of Roman luxury was built. Rome rests on arches, yes, but it also rests on backs like yours. And so we will not rush, we will not leap from monument to monument. But instead, we will walk slowly, carefully, feeling each stone beneath our sandals, feeling the clay amphora bite into our palm, feeling the cool condensation seeping onto our tunic, listening to the slosh of liquid that must not be spilled, smelling the mingled odors of earth and water, of dust and smoke, of bread beginning to bake somewhere nearby, of animals restless in their pens, of the faint, sweet tang of crushed grapes left over from the night before. These are the smells of Rome as much as incense in the temples or perfumes at a banquet, and they cling to you just as the burden of the jug clings to you, unavoidable, rhythmic, ordinary, eternal. And as you carry, as you walk, as you pause to shift the weight from one shoulder to another, you realize that water is not only substance but metaphor, not only necessity but symbol, for it is both gift and burden, both life and labor, both blessing and demand, a thread that ties city to citizens, empire to individual, luxury to sweat, arch to arm. And so, as you drift deeper into this vision, allow yourself to breathe with the city, to match its cadence, to let the words fall gently as the water falls, in a rhythm that soothes rather than stirs, in a flow that comforts rather than quickens. Because in Rome, as in life, everything is carried by rhythm, the rhythm of footsteps, the rhythm of water flowing, the rhythm of repetition that defines existence. Stone, water, and will, arches, channels, and hands. Rome rests upon these, and in this moment, as dawn unfolds, and the first true heat of day lies still beyond the horizon, you too may rest upon them, not as a ruler surveying marble, not as a senator debating law, but as a carrier of water, anonymous yet real, present in every drop that passes from fountain to villa, in every sigh of relief from a thirsty child, in every splash that cleans a dusty floor. The streets stir, the city breathes, the water flows. And you are part of it, now whether you wake to listen or drift into sleep. The rhythm holds you, the burden steadies you, the past carries you endlessly, gently, without end. Before the first warmth of the sun even touches the high walls of Rome, before the chatter of markets has begun, and before the amphitheaters stir with spectacle, there is the sound of you rising from the woven mat upon which you slept, a mat that smells faintly of straw and smoke. Your body stiff, your eyes heavy, yet already your mind turns toward the day ahead. For the day of a water carrier does not wait, it does not linger. It begins when the city is still half dreaming, when lamps flicker faintly behind shutters, when the air carries the cool breath of night, and so you push yourself upright slowly, rubbing sleep from your eyes, listening to the faint coo of doves settling along the eaves, their wings fluttering softly against plastered walls, a sound that is at once calming and urgent, a reminder that life already stirs around you. And with this thought you bend to tighten the leather thongs of your sandals, pulling them snug against calloused feet that know too well the weight of stone, the scrape of gravel, the hardness of marble steps that will test them throughout the hours to come. And after fastening them, you pause to glance at the amphorae, leaning against the wall, clay jars that will soon be your constant companions. Cool to the touch now, but destined to grow heavy, to bite into your shoulders, to sway against your side with each step you take, each one holding not only water, but the very expectation of those who will drink, bathe, cook, and clean, for in their emptiness now lies the certainty of fullness later. and in their stillness lies the promise of motion. You rise, you gather yourself, you run your hand briefly across the curved surface of the jug as if to greet it, as if to remind yourself that it is not enemy but partner, though it will punish you with its weight, though it will grind slowly into your bones still, it is the tool that allows you to make meaning of your labor. And so you lift it, adjusting your stance, feeling how your spine must straighten, how your arms must balance, how your shoulders must brace, and then you step outside. The air is cool, tinged with the faint smoke of last night's cooking fires, the faint salt of sweat dried into walls, the faint sweetness of bread already beginning to bake in ovens. Somewhere deeper in the city, and beneath it all there is the ever-present mineral temps of water, drifting faintly from fountains, from basins, from hidden rivulets that snake through Rome unseen like the veins of a vast body. The stones under your feet are cold, uneven, slick with dew, and as you walk, the sound of your sandals tapping lightly against them becomes a rhythm, soft at first, then steady, a rhythm you will repeat hundreds of times across this day, carrying, delivering, walking, returning. You make your way toward the fountain, your breath measured, your eyes catching the faint glow of dawn above tiled rooftops. The city slowly stretching itself awake as dogs bark distantly, as the murmur of early risers grows, as the trickle of water from the public basin sings louder the closer you come. You set the jug down, lower yourself, feel the cool splash of the stream against your fingers, the clarity of it reflecting sky, even in dim light. And as you scoop and fill, as you watch the liquid rise inside the amphora, you understand again the paradox of your work, that water is as light as mist when seen in a fountain, as delicate as rain when falling, as invisible as breath when flowing in aqueducts. Yet when contained, when captured, when made ready to serve human need, it becomes heavy, impossibly heavy, a weight that demands everything of you, a weight you will carry again and again. And so you lift, you balance, you brace, and you begin the first path, the first trip of the morning, walking slowly through the streets as the vessel presses against your shoulder, your muscles contracting to keep steady your pace, careful so that none of the precious water spills, because each drop is not just liquid but labor, each drop lost is strength wasted, and so your steps become precise, calculated, each heel planting firmly, each breath exhaled in rhythm, the amphora swaying like a pendulum against your body, reminding you with every jolt that this is not a single act but a cycle without end. As you walk, the smells deepen, the acrid smoke from torches just extinguished, the sourness of waste tossed into gutters, the pungent trace of fish left overnight in baskets, yet mixed among these is always the clean, cool scent of the water, the scent that steadies you, that comforts you, that reminds you of why this endless burden must be carried. You hear the calls of bakers adjusting their ovens, the grumble of oxen being led to carts, the murmur of women sweeping steps, and you weave among them unseen, not celebrated, not praised, yet essential, because without your steps, without the tilt of your body, without the strain of your arms, the jug would not arrive, the villa would not be served, the household would thirst. Step by step, you ascend a small slope, each stone biting into your soul, each rise in the path making the jug feel twice as heavy, and at last, when the villa gates appear, when the first destination is reached, you lower the jug carefully, feeling the ache release for a moment, feeling the strain ease, but knowing it will return. Knowing the emptiness of the jug on the return trip is no relief, because it only promises fullness again, and wait again, and so the cycle continues. Back to the fountain, back to the jug, back to the cool splash of water filling clay, back to the lift, back to the balance, back to the street, over and over as the hours stretch, each trip a microcosm of the day, each trip identical yet unique, each trip another layering of sensation, the roughness of the jug rim against your palm, the sweat collecting at your temples, the faint sting of dust in your throat, the chatter of children darting past, the clang of blacksmiths at work, the call of merchants advertising goods, the scent of olives, the scent of smoke, the scent of humanity pressed close in these narrow streets. The sun rises higher, warming stone, pressing heat against your shoulders, making the jug heavier still, though it has not changed its measure. Though only your body has grown more weary, yet still you walk, still you balance, still you carry, because this is the rhythm, this is the cycle, this is the unseen foundation upon which Rome rests, a foundation not of marble, but of backs like yours, of hands like yours, of steps like yours repeated endlessly across days, across years, across lives, until one life ends and another takes its place, until your sandals wear through and another pair begins its journey, until your name is forgotten. But the rhythm continues, the fountain fills, the jug is lifted, the water flows. The day of the water carrier is shaped not only by the rhythm of his body and the endless path between fountain and villa, but also by the tools that bind themselves to him as extensions of his own frame. The amphory, the buckets, the yokes, each object simple in appearance, yet dense with meaning, each one a companion, a burden, a teacher of patience, a sculptor of muscle and bone. And, if you look closely, if you allow your senses to linger upon them, you begin to understand that these are not mere containers, not mere instruments, but quiet presences that dictate the very texture of the work. And so it begins with the amphora, the clay vessel whose surface is cool in the morning, whose porous skin carries the faint scent of earth baked by fire, whose curved form narrows into a neck that fits neatly against the palm, whose weight in emptiness deceives you into forgetting the punishment of fullness. And as your hands brush across its roughness, you feel the granules of clay pressed into its shape, the faint ridges left by the potter's wheel, the story of its making embedded in every line, a reminder that this too was shaped by labor, that even the carrier of water is carried by the work of others. And when you tilt it to fill, you hear the echo of water striking inside, a hollow resonance that will soon become the muffled slosh of fullness, and you steady it, you grip it, you brace yourself, because once it is filled, it clings to you, binds itself to your balance, demands that you adjust your posture to its stubborn gravity. And so you learn to move with it, as if with a stubborn companion, leaning slightly, stepping carefully, your muscles tightening in silent negotiation with its pull. There are buckets, too, simpler, humbler than the amphora, shaped from wood, bound with iron. Their staves smelling faintly of resin, their insides stained by repeated contact with water, darkened with use, heavy not only with liquid, but with the history of countless dips and lifts. Their rope handles rough against the skin, fibers scratching into the palm until calluses form like natural armor. And when you lift these buckets, the ropes creak softly, the water inside shifts and sways, and you must anticipate the movement. You must counterbalance with your own body, leaning when it leans, steadying when it lurches. listening always to the language of liquid in motion, a language of splashes and sloshes, of subtle weight redistributions, a language that teaches you rhythm, lift, balance, step, lift, balance, step. Each repetition not only an act of labor but an incantation, a mantra whispered into the streets of Rome with each careful movement. And then there is the yoke, the tool that changes everything, a wooden beam carved smooth to rest upon the shoulders, worn by years of use, polished by sweat, darkened by oil from countless backs, its ends fitted with ropes or hooks from which the amphorae or buckets hang, a device at once merciful and merciless. For it spares the arms from direct burden, but lays the entire weight upon the spine, pressing down with a slow, steady force that reshapes posture, that compresses bone, that makes the carrier walk slightly bent as though bowed in reverence, as though in perpetual humility before the element he serves. And when you set the yoke upon your shoulders, you feel its chill at first, then the warmth, as it accepts the heat of your body, and you know that once balanced, once the vessels are secured, you are no longer walking freely, but moving as part of a machine of wood, clay, rope, and flesh fused together by necessity, inseparable until the task is done. Each of these tools has its voice, its texture, its way of speaking to the body. The amphora, whispering with sloshing water, the bucket, muttering with creaks of rope and splashes of liquid, the yoke groaning faintly as it shifts, and you, the carrier, are always listening, always adjusting, always repeating the same sacred cadence. Lift, balance, step, lift, balance, step, each syllable a reminder that this labor is not chaotic, but rhythmic, not random, but cyclical, a pattern as old as the city itself, as old as the first aqueduct that poured water into Rome's heart. The clay cools your hand, the rope scratches your palm, the wood presses into your shoulder, the water sings in your ear with every sway. And you realize that these sensations, these textures, are the architecture of your existence, the scaffolding upon which your endurance is built. You do not curse them, though they bruise you, though they weary you, for you know that without them your labor would be impossible. Without them there would be no water carried, no villas served, no families sustained, and so you treat them with a quiet reverence, placing the amphora down gently as though laying an elder to rest, coiling the rope neatly when the bucket is empty, rubbing oil into the yoke to preserve its grain. For you understand that to neglect them would be to neglect yourself, to shorten the life of your work, to dishonor the rhythm that sustains you. And so the cycle continues, not only in the carrying but in the care, in the maintenance, in the respect. And as you return again and again to the fountain, as you lift the amphora, as you feel the bucket sway, as you brace the yoke, you are repeating not only motions, but a ritual that binds you to generations of carriers before you and generations to come, each of them whispering the same unspoken chant through their bodies. Lift, balance, step, lift, balance, step, until it becomes indistinguishable from the beating of your heart, until the weight becomes part of your breath, until the slosh of water is as familiar as the sound of your own blood. And if one pauses to watch you, if one truly observes, they might think the act simple, the act monotonous. But you know that within the simplicity lies infinite variation, infinite awareness. For every amphora has a slightly different balance. Every bucket shifts uniquely. Every yoke fits differently upon the shoulder, depending on fatigue, depending on sweat, depending on the subtle tremor of muscles. And so every trip is the same and not the same. Every repetition, a new conversation with clay, with rope, with wood, with water. The tools define the day, as much as the steps do. They set the tone, they give texture to the silence. Between footsteps, they shape not only the body, but the mind, teaching patience, teaching humility, teaching the slow art of endurance. And as the hours pass, as the tools grow heavier with your fatigue, as the water sloshes more insistently, you continue still whispering the mantra under your breath, or not even aloud, but within your muscles, within your sinews. Lift, balance, step, lift, balance, step, a song without melody, a prayer without words, an eternal rhythm, etched into the stones of Rome, into the memory of the city, into the forgotten names of those who carried before you, into your own bones, that will one day lay down the yoke, set aside the amphora, release the rope, and finally rest. The path of the water carrier is never smooth, never free of interruption, for the streets of Rome are alive, restless, tangled with noise and motion, and each journey between fountain and villa is not only a test of endurance, but also a negotiation with chaos. And it begins with the sound before the sight, the distant rumble of wooden carts whose iron-bound wheels grind against the cobblestones, groaning like tired oxen, rattling so loudly that the very water in the amphora quivers in protest. And then they come into view, carts piled high with good sacks of grain spilling dust into the air, amphorae of oil clinking together like drunken companions, crates of figs and dates attracting swarms of flies. And you must pause, you must shift your weight, you must sidestep into the narrow gap between a wall and a doorway, pressing yourself against rough stone while the cart lumbers past, its driver shouting at his mules, his voice cracked and impatient, the air full of the bray of animals, the creak of leather harness, the stink of dung and sweat. And when it passes, you step forward again, careful to steady the sloshing liquid, whispering once more your inner chant: lift, balance, step, lift, balance, step, though each time it is interrupted by the unexpected. For next comes the merchants, voices sharp as knives, standing in clusters near their stalls, hawking goods in a dozen dialects, thrusting cloth, olives, bread before the eyes of passers-by, some reaching toward you, offering strong sandals for a strong back, laughing at their own jokes, their laughter rising above the drone of the crowd, and you must resist the urge to look, to engage, for your arms ache, your yoke presses into your shoulders, and you know that one glance could spill the balance of your load. And yet you hear them still, their voices chasing you down the street like insistent bees, and woven into this din are the cries of children, darting suddenly across your path, their bare feet slapping the stones, their laughter wild and high, chasing each other in games that seem to have no boundaries, no awareness of your burden. And you must halt abruptly, pressing your knees together to steady the swinging amphora, muttering beneath your breath, half amused, half exasperated, as the children scatter like birds, leaving you trembling with the effort of balance your shoulders, burning your lips, twisted in a smile you did not intend, for even in their nuisance they carry the joy of freedom you long ago surrendered. And then there are the animals, not only the mules dragging carts, but donkeys laden with firewood, goats weaving unpredictably through legs, dogs snapping at scraps, each creature a moving obstacle, each one demanding yet another adjustment of step. And sometimes the bray of a donkey is so loud, so sudden, that it startles your very heartbeat, sending a shiver through your grip, and you curse softly, though the donkey pays no mind, its eyes half-lidded, chewing indifferently as if mocking your struggle. All around you, the grandeur of Rome towers, marble columns gleaming in sunlight, statues of gods standing aloof, and perfect temples rising with steps too wide, too pristine, their shadows falling across your sweat-streaked skin. And in that contrast lies a strange irony. You, bent and dripping with effort, pass beneath arches built to commemorate victories of emperors, your sandals coated in grime as you tread the same stones polished by triumphal processions, and you realize that though the city celebrates its grandeur, it is sustained by your burden, by your uncelebrated steps, by the weight you carry in silence. And this realization does not embitter you so much as it makes you laugh quietly, inwardly, a laughter that tastes of irony and dust. For what else can you do but laugh when marble gods look down upon your bent back? And if not gods, then men aristocrats, gliding past in litters carried by slaves, their garments spotless, their sandals untarnished, their eyes sliding past you as though you are invisible, or worse, as though you are simply part of the scenery, like the stones or the gutters, a fixture of the street to be ignored. And sometimes one of them wrinkles his nose at the smell of sweat. Sometimes one lets his gaze rest too long, curious perhaps, but never empathetic, and you learn to lower your eyes, to yield the path, to step aside with patience, for the collision of your clay vessel against their silk tunic would cost you more dearly than the weight itself. And so you bow invisibly, your yoke creaking, your feet shuffling aside, your heart whispering again, lift, balance, step, lift, balance, step. Yet not all who notice you are silent, for there are the drunken voices too, spilling from taverns in the heat of afternoon, men swaying in doorways, shouting mockery, their words slurred but sharp. Careful, water-bearer, don't drown yourself before you reach the villa. And they laugh at their own wit, raising cups of sour wine. And though part of you bristles, part of you longs to retort, you bite your tongue, for you know a stumble in anger would cost you more than their laughter. And so you smile tightly, you endure, you whisper inwardly, lift, balance, step, even as their words follow you down the street. There are puddles too, shallow yet treacherous, reflecting the sky but hiding the slickness of moss beneath. And when your sandal slides, you feel your heart leap, your body jolting as you steady yourself, the slosh of water threatening to spill, and you right yourself again, breathing slow, reminding yourself that every step is survival, that balance is victory, that the city is always testing you, always throwing some new trial into your path. Even the wind becomes an adversary, funneling suddenly down narrow alleys, lifting dust into your eyes, pressing against the flat surface of your load, tugging at the water as though it wished to topple it, and still you endure, squinting, coughing, leaning forward with slow determination. The street itself seems alive, not merely stone but a living, shifting creature, breathing through wheels and hooves, sighing through voices and laughter, whispering through water that flows in gutters. And you are but one small part of its endless motion, caught between grandeur and filth, between marble and mud, between silence and laughter. Yet in every obstacle there is also rhythm, in every interruption another chance to repeat the mantra, to deepen its echo within your bones. Lift, balance, step, lift, balance, step. And sometimes, though rarely, kindness breaks through the din, a passerby stepping aside quickly with a nod, a child calling a warning as a cart barrels forward, a fellow laborer offering a half-smile that says, "Without words, I too know this burden." And in those moments, you feel less alone. You feel that the city, is not entirely indifferent, that beneath its grandeur and grime it is made up of people who, like you, carry their own unseen weights. Still, most often, it is indifference, mockery, noise, and chaos that greet you. And yet you press on, not because you love it, not because you hope for thanks, but because this is the rhythm of life. This is the ritual you perform for bread, for family, for the continuation of your place within the vast and glittering organism called Rome. And though the streets try to shake you, though carts rattle, donkeys bray, merchants shout, children dart, drunks jeer, aristocrats ignore, still you whisper to yourself, slower now, but no less steady. Lift, balance, step, lift, balance, step, until the sound of your feet merges with the heartbeat of the city, until the obstacles themselves become part of the rhythm. Not disruptions, but accents, not chaos, but texture, the rough grain of existence against which your endurance is sharpened, and so you carry on, not defeated, not victorious, simply enduring, endlessly enduring, until the fountain is reached again and the cycle begins anew. The water carriers are the invisible pulse of the city, a class tolerated because they are necessary, yet rarely celebrated, rarely honored. Their backs bent beneath the daily burden, while the city above them gleams with marble and gold. And to most passers-by, they are not individuals, but moving shadows, background figures that slip between the grandeur of temples and the grime of alleyways, bodies that carry water so that others may drink, wash, feast, and worship. And though the fountains would run dry without them, though the villas would find their courtyards silent without the splash of fresh water, still no statue is raised, no ode composed, and in this silence of recognition they learn to carry themselves as ghosts, present but unseen, necessary but unacknowledged, and yet invisibility grants them a peculiar kind of freedom. For what is unseen is often also unheard, and what is unheard becomes privy to secrets, to the murmurs and laughter of those who forget that the water-bearer, bent beneath his yoke, is still a man with ears. And so as they move from street to villa, they become unwilling witnesses to gossip that clings to the air like incense lovers quarreling in half-whispers at the edge of a colonnade, wives murmuring about the infidelities of neighbors, merchants muttering about tax collectors, slaves confiding complaints when they think no one listens, senators, servants sharing scraps of political rumor in doorways, and all of it drifts into the ears of the water carrier, who carries not only clay amphorae, but also fragments of other lives, stray syllables of scandal and confession that cling to memory like droplets that refuse to evaporate. And though he rarely repeats them, though his own tongue is weary from silence, still he knows things about the city that the city does not know about itself. A secret chorus of murmurs stored within his steps. And when water carriers cross paths with one another in this endless circuit of lifting, balancing, stepping, there is a quiet recognition, a brotherhood unspoken, forged not in triumphs or feasts, but in sweat and soreness, in the long ache of shoulders pressed by wood. And their greetings are small, sometimes no more than a tilt of the head, a brief glance that says, "I know what you carry, for I carry it too." Yet, in those fleeting exchanges, there is a depth of solidarity that no patrician banquets could ever match, and sometimes, when their paths allow, one will shift his load for a moment, extend a hand to steady the sloshing jar of another. Their palms rough and quick, the gesture wordless, but heavy with meaning, for only one who knows the labor can anticipate its dangers. Only one who has felt the tremor of tired knees can see it coming in another. And so in those small gestures lives a companionship stronger than feasts or coins. There are also moments of humor, light as breath in the midst of burden, when two carriers pause briefly at a fountain's edge, their jars filling side by side, and one pulls from his pouch a crust of bread or a handful of olives, offering half without ceremony, the exchange more nourishing than the food itself, for in the sharing lies relief, a reminder that even in invisibility there is connection. And as they chew slowly, leaning against stone, they whisper their complaints, low enough that no overseer, no villa steward can hear. Jokes about the absurdity of carrying gallons of water past temples dedicated to gods who could summon rivers with a gesture, or dry comments about aristocrats who spill more wine in an evening than a carrier could deliver in a day. And in these whispered complaints is a kind of resilience, a defiance that keeps the weight from crushing the spirit. Laughter, soft and fleeting, but real enough to lighten the next lift. Sometimes they even swap tales of missteps, one describing with mock grandeur the time he slipped on moss and drenched the sandals of a senator's nephew, another mimicking the bray of a donkey that startled him so badly he nearly dropped both amphorae, and they laughed together, not cruelly, but with the weary joy of men who know that survival requires laughter as much as bread, and in their laughter they momentarily undo the invisibility imposed by the city. For in those moments they see each other, hear each other, confirm each other's existence in a world that prefers to let them pass unmarked. And yet, once the jars are filled and the bread finished, once the laughter fades into the air, they lift again, balance again, step again, returning to the rhythm that defines their place, merging once more into the faceless tide of labor that flows beneath Rome's shining face, carrying both the silence of their burden and the secret music of their camaraderie. For this is the paradox of their station, invisible to the city, yet deeply visible to one another, unheard by the powerful yet hearers of countless whispered truths, mocked by drunks, yet sustained by shared crumbs and shared laughter, ignored by statues, yet carving silently their own endurance into the stones of the street, step after step, jar after jar, drop after drop, until the city itself would wither without their hidden labor, until the marble grandeur would collapse into thirst without the unseen rhythm of their chant. Lift, balance, step, code not alone, but quietly together. A brotherhood carried not in laurel wreaths, but in the enduring weight of clay and water. The body carries water, but the mind drifts, wandering into spaces that are at once heavier and lighter than the clay jars. For, as the sandals slap against the dusted stones, and the shoulders grow sore with the press of the yoke, the mind cannot help but wander into questions, some small, some vast, some never to be answered. And it begins with the simple flicker of curiosity. Why so much water today? Is there a feast to be prepared behind those tall villa walls? A wedding, perhaps, with laughter waiting to burst forth once the amphorae are poured into waiting basins? Or is it that the master has called for a bath to be filled, the great marble tub demanding gallons upon gallons, enough to drown a man if it were tipped? And so you, with your tired hands, must ferry the river in increments, step after step, trip after trip, until the master may sink into his bath and sigh in pleasure without once imagining the aching trail of labor behind it. And you wonder, not bitterly but curiously, whether the rich ever think of the small chain of movements that make their luxury possible. Whether they imagine the rhythm of sandals, the slosh of jars, the sweat that beads into eyes, or whether the water, once delivered, erases its history, becoming simply water, detached from the body that bore it, anonymous as rain. And then the curiosity deepens, becoming less about the villas and more about the world itself. Why water flows so endlessly from the aqueducts. Why stone and slope and gravity can conspire to feed an entire city. Why the gods allow the streams to run without failing, and whether one day, as surely as fires burn or earth shakes, the water might stop and the city would falter. And in that imagined silence, you picture the fountains standing dry, the fish in their marble pools, gasping, the baths empty and echoing. And only then would the city notice the absence. Only then would the water carriers, so long unseen, suddenly be remembered not as shadows, but as lifelines, though by then it might be too late. For thirst unmasks truths that plenty conceals. And beneath all this wondering is the private rhythm of the labor itself. A music without instrument, a song without voice, a pulse that rises from the repetition. For as the jar rests against the shoulder, the clay pressing bone, the sound is not only of sloshing water, but of a low hum, almost imagined, as if the jug sings in sympathy with your own body, and your steps fall into time with it. And soon the entire act of carrying is less an ordeal and more a dance, weary but steady, your body swaying slightly, hips adjusting, knees bending back, compensating until the movements become instinctive, a choreography carved by necessity. And in this choreography there is a strange kind of peace. For while the work is unending, it is also predictable, and within that predictability lies comfort, a rhythm that holds you like a chant. Lift, balance, step, each wordless repetition, a mantra that carries you farther than thought alone ever could. And as the hours pass, the body sways, as though it were part of some larger tide, as though you are not merely one man with jars, but one current in a greater river. Your feet drops of rain, your steps rivulets that merge into the city's flow. And this thought, this blending of self with water, brings a subtle solace, as if you are not entirely alone, for water itself labors with you, leaning into the jar, urging you forward, whispering its own song. Pour me, pour me, pour me. And though no one thanks you, though your name will not be recorded in marble, still there is a bond between you and the element you bear, as though you and water are companions in endurance, flowing together through streets that neither of you owns, yet both of you sustain. And then another thought drifts in, unbidden but steady. What is the weight of life, if not a series of burdens borne, shouldered in rhythm, endured with patience, lightened by laughter when possible? And if so, then is this labor so different from any other? Is the amphora not just a mirror of existence itself, heavy, fragile, necessary, carried one step at a time, until the day ends, until darkness falls, until the burden is set down at last? And with this thought comes a kind of release, a breath that fills the chest despite the ache of the yoke, a breath that says, this is hard, yes, but this is also life. And in this rhythm, in this unseen music of jug against bone and sandal against stone, there is meaning, quiet and unsung, but meaning nonetheless. And so you continue humming with the jug, swaying with the body, curious still about feasts and baths, but steadied by the deeper truth that labor itself has its own song, and you, though invisible, are part of its choir. Water as cosmic element is not simply an idea whispered in passing, but a long, slow current that runs through Roman imagination, through ritual, through engineering, through the daily life of those who touched it, drank it, carried it, prayed by it, and feared its withdrawal. For in Rome, the presence of water was never merely a question of thirst, nor merely a matter of hygiene, but a matter of cosmic alignment, a matter of the city being in harmony with powers beyond the stone, beyond the arch, beyond the aqueduct, because water was born not of pipes or channels, but of nymphs and rivers and gods who dwelt where mortal vision failed. And to speak of it was to acknowledge a lineage that traced not to artisans, but to Neptune's trident and to the breath of the springs that gushed from sacred earth, so that every drop felt like a gift offered on loan, not a possession, not a commodity, but a gift. And so, as you imagine yourself in this role, as a humble carrier, jar pressing against your shoulder, clay rough, rope biting faintly against your palm, the thought that this burden is in truth divine weight is never far away. For you walk not only with liquid, but with blessing. You walk with what the ancients named Numen, the divine presence, invisible but tangible in the slosh and sway of the amphora. And so each step feels like a continuation of a myth that began before you, before your parents, before the founding of the city. A myth that whispers, water remembers, water carries, water connects, and you feel it in your bones, in your weary muscles, in your breath that quickens with the incline of the street. Because the Romans, your neighbors, your employers, your overseers, all look upon the aqueducts with awe, those monumental arches cutting the horizon, those endless colonnades of stone seeming almost to march in procession, a line of giants frozen in stride. But they know, as you know, that beneath their grandeur flows something older, something that began in distant hills where springs opened with a gurgle as if the earth itself sighed, where nymphs were believed to dance, half-seen figures with hair dripping silver, where the first trickle was never simply liquid, but laughter, music, and grace, so that when those rivulets were gathered, coaxed, guided, disciplined into channels, the Romans never forgot the wild sanctity that remained within. And so even in concrete, even in lead pipe, even in carved fountain, there is myth, there is whisper, there is presence. And when you tilt your jar under the arc of the spout and hear the gurgle echo, you might imagine, if you listen carefully, that it is not stone and mortar speaking, but a goddess, speaking slowly, telling you that your labor matters, that your hands are part of a cosmic order, that your sweat joins the invisible liturgy of Rome itself. Because aqueducts are not merely utilities, they are arteries of the divine, pumping life as blood flows from heart to limb. And the city is not city without them, and you know it, as you know your own veins. For when the jar is full, it is heavy, impossibly heavy, yet also light, because within it pulses continuity, memory, blessing. And when you lift it, you feel both small and infinite. For what you carry in miniature mirrors the colossal flows arching above, so that there is always contrast, always balance, the humble jar against the vast aqueduct, cosmic in scale, but intimate in the hand, so that Rome exists simultaneously in grandeur and simplicity, and your daily burden is both cosmic ritual and ordinary necessity. And in the rhythm of your walk, step by step, you find the metaphors returning again and again: stone, water, and will, arches, channels, and hands. Rome rests upon these, and you feel the cadence not only in words but in muscles, in the strain of the back, in the tender calluses that form and reform. For every repetition is reminder, and every reminder is prayer, though unspoken, though unnoticed, and as dawn light strikes the high arc of an aqueduct, making the water within shimmer like a hidden star river, you remember that water remembers, that it carries not only itself, but stories, fragments, whispers of those who touched it before you, upstream, in mountain spring, in forest shade, in sacred grotto. And you know that when it reaches fountain, it is not merely water, but history made liquid, memory made drinkable. And so you do not despise the burden, though it aches, though it wears you down, because in carrying you join continuity, you become link, you become vessel, and perhaps the gods see this, perhaps. Neptune in his vast domain glances from sea to spring and sees you, insignificant, yet essential, moving, like an ant beneath arches, carrying cosmic weight, disguised as domestic necessity, and perhaps he smiles, or perhaps he is indifferent, for gods are vast and men are fleeting, yet the water itself is never indifferent. It hums, it presses, it whispers, and when it spills, it blesses the earth, and when it quenches, it blesses the flesh, and when it pools, it mirrors the sky. And so in every form it speaks, and you are part of its speech, because you, too, carry. And carrying is the way Rome lives, carrying is the way Rome breathes, carrying is the way Rome connects to its own cosmic element, water, endlessly flowing, endlessly remembered, endlessly connecting. Labor as ritual, though seldom named as such by those who practice it, unfolds in Rome as silently as the rising sun. And if you pause long enough to feel the texture of each movement, you will see that the carrying of water, the heaving of jars, the balancing of clay against shoulder, the soft scrape of rope against skin, is not merely labor but liturgy, not merely burden but offering, because each trip from fountain to villa, from spout to atrium, resembles a procession more ancient than memory. And though no temple official proclaims it, though no herald calls for silence, you find yourself moving, as priests do, with measured pace, with deliberate steps, each stride echoing the cadence of sacred ceremony. And it becomes clear that in your routine you mirror ritual, that in your rhythm you rehearse devotion, and perhaps without knowing, you participate in a hidden festival that never ends. And so when you wake before dawn, tying your sandals with fingers still heavy from sleep, you feel the day stretch before you like an altar. And as you step into the cool streets, still wrapped in shadow, the city becomes your temple, each stone anointed with dew, each arch solemn as a gate of mystery, and you are its priest, unordained, but necessary, moving quietly, with weight upon your back and intent upon your breath. And the air itself seems to join your rite, carrying faint smoke from unseen hearths, carrying coos of doves nesting in eaves, carrying murmurs of waking bodies who, without water, would remain unwashed, unrefreshed, unprepared for their own tasks. So your labor is more than yours. It is theirs too, a preparation for their days, an initiation into their own rhythms. And in this recognition you feel the sacred pulse beneath your fatigue, because the body obeys a rhythm older than you, older than the city, a rhythm that beats in threes: step, breath, offering, step, breath, offering, step, breath, offering, a cadence that lulls you even as it drives you, a cadence that matches heartbeat, that matches tide, that matches the prayers you overhear muttered by matrons before shrines, so that though you say no prayers, you are a prayer, though you carry no incense. Your sweat becomes incense, though you pour no wine. Your water becomes libation, poured out upon the hearth, upon the hand, upon the mouth of Rome itself. And the marvel is that few see it, few honor it, yet the gods may see. For gods are not blind to hidden offerings, and so perhaps every time you tip your jar, letting water fall into basin or jug, what seems to others simple utility is to unseen eyes, libation, offering, thanksgiving, the quietest of sacrifices, a sacrifice of time, of muscle, of patience, and in that sacrifice lies sanctity, though unacknowledged, and you, weary as you are, sense it faintly, as a shimmer behind ordinary sight. So that sometimes as you walk past a temple hearing priests chant, hearing instruments drone, you recognize kinship, for they walk in ceremony and you walk in labor. But both of you walk with rhythm, both of you mark the day with repeated gesture. Both of you embody order against chaos, pattern against randomness. And perhaps the only difference is that theirs is recognized and yours is hidden. Theirs is sung and yours is silent. But both echo the same cosmic order. Both align mortal flesh to divine flow. And so your procession, from fountain to villa, becomes part of a larger procession, unending, linking you to countless others. For you are not the first water carrier, nor the last, but one in an endless file, each following the other, each tracing the same path, each walking the same cadence. So that when you glance down the street and see another bearer, jar upon shoulder, sweat shining on brow, you nod. And in that nod lies recognition, lies communion, lies the sense of brotherhood that unites those who labor unseen. And this too feels ritual, this too feels sacred. For even your camaraderie is like that of priests exchanging glances across altars, each affirming the other's place in ceremony, each affirming that together you uphold Rome, not in marble speeches, but in silent steps. And thus labor becomes ritual, and ritual becomes labor. And there is no seam between them, only continuity, only rhythm, only the endless cadence of step breath, offering, step breath, offering, until the repetition hypnotizes, until the repetition dissolves the boundary between body and act, until you are no longer a man carrying but a movement, unfolding a gesture, repeating a prayer embodied. And in this transformation, the ordinary becomes luminous, the mundane becomes holy. And though you will never be carved in marble, though no poet will name you, you know in your marrow that each drop poured is part of Rome's hidden liturgy, part of Rome's endless ceremony, and you, in your quiet persistence, are both priest and offering, celebrant and sacrifice, anonymous yet eternal, because the city drinks only through you, and through you the gods are served, even if no one bows, even if no one chants, because the act itself is enough, the rhythm itself is prayer, the pouring itself is libation, and your labor is ritual, as it always was, as it always will be. Invisible priesthood, silent clergy of the streets, the water carriers of Rome move through the avenues and alleyways like shadows, like unnoticed acolytes of a temple so vast that it has no walls, for the temple is Rome itself, breathing, steaming, consuming, and it is upon their bent shoulders that its thirst is quenched, upon their blistered hands that its fountains flow into villas, upon their weary strides that its baths fill with cleansing water. And yet, though their footsteps keep the pulse of the city, though their jars bear what sustains its body, they remain unseen, anonymous, as if the grandeur of Rome rests upon foundations deliberately ignored, as if the very invisibility of these laborers is what allows the marble, the statues, the arches to shine without stain of sweat. But if you pause and look carefully, if you trace the patterns of the city back to their hidden sources, you will see them for what they are. You will see the carriers not as common workers, but as a dispersed brotherhood of priests, unspeaking, unsummoned, yet essential. For every temple has its keepers, and every altar its offerings. And in Rome, the altars are endless hearths, baths, fountains, kitchens, and the offerings are not wine, not blood, not incense, but water. And the priests of this element are those who bow not in marble sanctuaries, but in cramped lanes. Those who chant not with voices, but with breaths strained under weight. Those who wear no embroidered robes, but bear instead the vestments of toil. Garments darkened with sweat, shoulders marked by ropes, feet hardened by endless stones, so that their bruises are their vestments, their calluses, their relics, their scars, their stigmata, silent yet radiant with meaning, marks of service inscribed by the gods themselves. Who see what citizens ignore? Who honor what senators overlook? Because divinity, unlike men, does not mistake marble for sacrifice, nor statues for devotion, but instead whispers over the bowed backs of carriers, recognizing in their rhythm the true liturgy of survival. For what is survival, if not a daily sacrament? A sacrament performed not in rare festivals, but in ceaseless repetitions. Lift, balance, step, pour, lift, balance, step, pour, each movement echoing as prayer, each trip enacted as procession. And in this perspective, the city is revealed differently, not as a monument of emperors, but as a congregation held together by the invisible priesthood of laborers, men who, though unrecorded, sustain the lives of all who record, who legislate, who rule. And so it is, these carriers who are the hidden clergy of Rome, ministers of the element, without which no voice could sing, no soldier march, no child grow. And though the patricians may pass them with eyes averted, though merchants shout over them, though drunken men mock them, though aristocrats ignore them as if they were less than shadows, the gods lean closer, listening to the creak of amphora against yoke as if it were a psalm, watching the drip of spilled water on the stones as if it were libation. And in the hush of dawn, when the city stirs but has not yet raised its noise, perhaps the gods speak to them, not with words but with presence, a warmth on the skin, a breath in the ear, a certainty in the chest, that, though invisible to men, they are visible to eternity. And this is the paradox, that anonymity among mortals may mean honor among gods, that neglect in the marketplace may mean reverence in Olympus. And so the carriers, though silent, though faceless in history's scrawl, are inscribed in the living memory of the divine, as necessary as priests who tend altars, as sacred as virgins who keep the flame. For survival itself is liturgy, and these men are its officiants, walking through the marble avenues as through endless aisles of a church without roof, carrying their jars as chalices, pouring out water as sacrament, their bruised shoulders the seals of devotion, their tired breath the chants of a hidden choir, their sweat the incense of a ritual no less holy for being unnamed, no less binding for being uncelebrated. Because the gods whisper what Rome forgets, that beneath its splendor, beneath its triumphs, beneath its empire, it stands upon the unbroken cadence of those who carried water. the invisible priesthood whose ritual was the city's survival, whose labor was liturgy, whose anonymity was sanctity. And though history will not carve their names, the gods have already written them, silently, eternally, in the flowing of the Tiber, in the murmuring of every fountain, in the endless, sacred music of water. Sweat as sacrifice, the unnoticed libation poured not from goblets of gold, but from the human body itself, from the brow, from the spine, from the palms that grip and the shoulders that strain, each drop sliding down and darkening the earth as though it were wine spilled across an altar. And though no priest chants beside you, though no chorus lifts its voices, though no incense swirls in curling smoke, still the sacrifice is real, still the gods see. For the body is altar and the work is offering, and every moment of exertion is a ritual that binds you not only to the city of Rome, but to the eternal rhythm of giving, of surrendering the self so that something larger may live, so that the household has water, the bathhouse has cleansing, the fountains continue to murmur their endless song, and if temples resound with the slaughter of oxen, with the spilling of blood, then the streets resound with another kind of sacrifice, quieter, more constant, without spectacle, the sacrifice of sweat, which falls not in sudden gushes, but in steady rhythm, each bead a small votive, each stain upon the tunic a record of devotion, each salt crust upon the skin a testament written in the language of endurance. And so you walk, jar pressing into flesh, back aching beneath the weight, and with every step you are reminded that this is not wasted, that nothing in labor is wasted, for even as your strength diminishes, it is transmuted into the city's life. Your exhaustion becomes its vitality, your weariness becomes its renewal. Your effort is not lost but transformed, carried forward in the splashing of water into vessels, in the laughter of children splashing at fountains, in the relief of a tired woman who fills her cup. And so the logic of sacrifice is fulfilled, something given, something received, something exchanged, and always the balance maintained, and the city breathes because you give again. You give without end, the rhythm relentless, but holy for repetition. Itself is sanctity, and the gods are not impressed by rarity, but by constancy, not by one grand feast, but by uncountable daily offerings, not by marble, but by the continual flow of sweat and breath. And so your body, in its ache, in its fatigue, in its dripping salt, becomes the truest votive Rome can offer, more enduring than oxen, more sincere than incense, because it is ceaseless, because it is unadorned, because it is human. And perhaps the gods prefer this, not the staged drama of sacrifice before a crowd, but the quiet dripping of sweat in an alley where no one looks, the invisible gift given without recognition, the offering poured without acknowledgement, the ceaseless libation that writes itself into the stones beneath your feet, staining them, sanctifying them, until even the dust remembers the devotion, until even the walls hum with the memory of labor, until even the air tastes of salt and effort, as if the entire city were consecrated by your exhaustion, made sacred by your depletion. And still you go on, because the work calls, because the city thirsts, because the offering cannot end, and you give again, you give without end, until you are no longer certain where you stop and the city begins, until your sweat becomes indistinguishable from the waters you carry, until you yourself are water poured out, consumed, absorbed into the body of Rome. And this, too, is transmutation. This, too, is sanctity. For what greater sacrifice than to dissolve the boundary between self and city, to become what you serve, to flow as the aqueduct flows, to vanish into the fountain's song, leaving no monument but the memory of salt on stone. And yet within that vanishing lies the deepest offering, a surrender beyond recognition, a gift beyond thanks, and the gods, leaning close, whisper approval, whisper acknowledgement, whisper that in every drop of sweat the city is blessed, in every exhausted sigh Rome is sustained, in every weary stride eternity is honored, because you give again, you give without end, and this is the holiest sacrifice of all. Moments of transcendence arrive not in thunder, not in spectacle, not in the fire of torches raised before marble gods, but in stillness, in evenings when the city quiets, when the donkeys cease their braying and the vendors close their stalls, and you find yourself lingering at the fountain with jar in hand, pausing before the return journey, pausing before the weight is lifted once more, pausing to let the air settle into calm. And it is here, at this ordinary basin of carved stone, this utilitarian source of water, that something greater reveals itself. For the surface of the pool catches the sky, and though you had come only to fill your vessel, you now find that you are gazing into a mirror, into a reflection where your face hovers alongside drifting clouds and the fading pink of dusk. And for a breath you are doubled, mortal and infinite, laborer and witness, flesh and shadow, and the boundary feels porous, uncertain, and you cannot help but sense that what you carry each day is not mere water, but a piece of the divine, liquid light captured, liquid sky gathered into clay, the tangible brush of gods who prefer to dwell not only in temples, but in streams, in wells, in fountains where the city drinks. And so you linger longer, hearing faint prayers carried on the breeze, a woman murmuring gratitude for the health of her child, an old man whispering for relief from pain, and their voices seem to ripple through the water, as though each plea, each hope, is carried upon the current. And suddenly you feel that you are not only a carrier of liquid, but a bearer of prayer, that within your jars. And the realization is quiet, humbling, but also luminous. For you see yourself differently, you see the work differently, no longer only as toil, as devotion disguised in labor. For what is religion but the weaving of the ordinary with the sacred? And what is ritual but repetition transformed into meaning? And though no congregation gathers, though no altar glows, though no incense clouds the air still, the city is your temple still, the water your relic, still your hands, the vessels of grace, and the fountain at dusk, your sanctuary, where silence deepens and sky touches stone, where water reflects both mortal face and divine shimmer, where the surface itself becomes a sermon, telling you that nothing separates human from eternal except the stillness to notice. And so you learn to pause, to let transcendence slip quietly into your bones, to understand that even the smallest droplet in your jar gleams with cosmos, to feel that each delivery is a prayer answered before it is spoken, and when at last you heft the weight again, when you turn back into the narrow street, it is not only your body that carries, but your soul steady, as the waters flow luminous, as the fading sky consecrated by the simple truth that in carrying water, and in carrying the world, you carry the divine liturgy disguised as work, eternity disguised as evening silence, transcendence caught in the shimmer of a fountain at rest, The body of the Roman water carrier, when seen not as an individual husk of flesh, but as a quiet piece of living architecture, reveals itself as a structure as carefully formed and as necessary as the aqueducts that crown the hills, as the arches that stride across valleys, as the stones that knit the city together. And yet, unlike the marble monuments, it is never gazed at, never preserved in memory, and never raised into glory. It is used, worn, reshaped, until it dissolves back into the soil of Rome, leaving only faint imprints of its service. But to linger within this vision and to trace the outlines of that body is to discover that bones can be columns. Ribs, vaults, tendons, aqueduct, arches, lungs, cisterns, shoulders, supporting beams, feet, the very paving stones that carry forward the whole edifice of labor. And in this way the man is not merely in the city, but is the city, one fragment of its structure, hidden in plain sight, a stone that breathes. Imagine him at dawn, pulling himself upright from a rough cot, sinews groaning like timbers settling after night, vertebrae stacking like bricks, the spine not just his own backbone but the invisible column that will hold weight after weight of amphora against it. As he tightens his belt and adjusts his sandals, he is shoring up foundations, ensuring the body's frame can withstand the day's cargo. And when he steps out onto the cobblestones, he is a moving scaffold, built to bear water from fountain to villa, from cistern to bathhouse, a structure in motion, endlessly used, never praised. His shoulders tell the story first. They are not wide in the way of athletes, but bowed, pulled forward, stooped beneath the press of clay jars, as though the arches of Rome had leaned down and pressed themselves into his frame. Each day they deepen their curve, each day the body settles more fully into its destiny, until posture itself becomes monument, until gait itself becomes inscription. The skin hardens, 2 calluses spread across his palms, thick ridges along his fingers where rope has cut, and rubbed, small hardened mosaics, patterned into flesh, tesserae of pain and survival, glistening in their own silent arrangement. On his shoulders, where the amphora rims bite, bruises flower and fade, reappearing in endless cycles, a dark mural that never vanishes, always renewed, painted again and again by weight and time. The heels crack from the miles of stone fissures, splitting like dry aqueduct walls, yet they carry him still, for this architecture is built not for beauty, but for endurance, not for worship, but for use, and even in its fraying, it is serviceable. Like an old bridge, still bearing carts, though worn by centuries. The lungs, those hidden cisterns fill, and empty every breath another measure of Rome's pulse, every exhale a little offering to the dust, every inhale the drawing in of the city's mixture of smoke, bread, dung, and incense. They are reservoirs not only of air, but of time, marking the pace of each journey, aligning body and labor to a rhythm as steady as water's own flow, so that breath becomes step, and step becomes habit, and habit becomes form, and form becomes fate. In that cadence lies the truth of architecture. Once established, it shapes everything thereafter. Just as Rome's aqueduct arches could not be altered once their stones were set, so too does the carrier's body, bent into routine, remain shaped by that repetition, until he is his work embodied. To walk behind him on the narrow streets is to see not merely a man, but a kind of living colonnade. Each stride a supporting column, each tilt of the shoulder a keystone, each bead of sweat a droplet of mortar holding the invisible city together. He is ignored by passers-by. But if you watch carefully, the geometry of his being emerges. Symmetry in the sway of amphora from side to side. Balance in the slow rolling of feet upon stone. A rhythm so exact it becomes architectural music, unnoticed yet binding. When he pauses, leaning against a wall, body bowed forward, arms slack, he resembles a doorway waiting for its next opening. When he bends, lowering the jar into a trough or pouring into a basin, his spine forms an arch, his arms channels, the liquid rushing down them as though sculpted channels in marble. When he rises again, straightening with effort, he is a column lifting upward, quivering but unbroken. And in all these shapes his body declares its architecture, a secret echo of the monuments that surround him. And this reshaping is not romantic, but real. Cartilage wears thin. Vertebrae compress, shoulders hunch until ribs nearly kiss the hips. Legs knot with muscle, veins raise like cords. And yet, in these changes, there is the dignity of structure fulfilling its purpose, a kind of living engineering. The body is Rome's hidden masonry, and though no architect sketched it, it has been drafted by repetition itself, by labor's drafting hand. Imagine tracing with your finger the line of his spine. You would feel not smoothness, but edges, like stones stacked. Imagine pressing his palm. You would not find softness, but thickened pads, as though walking on mosaic floors had been inscribed into flesh. Imagine listening to his breathing. You would hear the deep, hollow resonance of cisterns filling, draining, filling again. And through this living architecture, through this city in miniature, Rome survives. Not through emperors or generals, not through marble and law, but through this stooped, reshaped frame that carries water endlessly. Step becomes habit, habit becomes form, form becomes fate, and the body, bent into its destiny, becomes both the scaffolding and the forgotten cornerstone of empire. Every bruise on the water carrier's shoulder, every rope burn etched into his palm, every crack across his heel is more than injury, more than pain, more than the passing discomfort of a day's labor. It is inscription, it is record, it is a text written not with ink but with toil, and the body itself becomes the living tablet upon which the story of service is recorded, not in letters but in welts, not in sentences but in scars, not in volumes bound in leather but in flesh that bends and heals and bends again, until the surface is as layered and meaningful as any marble stele standing in the forum. For just as Rome carves its decrees into stone, so does labor carve its decrees into skin. And those who know how to read can see within the bruises a testimony of survival, a script of devotion unacknowledged by history. Look at his shoulder at dusk after the jars have been lifted and lowered 100 times. There blooms the deep purple of amphora, rims pressing again and again into muscle, a flower that blossoms only to fade into yellow, only to vanish for a day before returning once more. A cycle of color as reliable as sunrise, a hidden calendar of burden kept on the body itself. And along the palms, ridges appear where ropes have cut, red at first, then darkened, then hardened into lines that remain even when the day is over, even when the rope has been dropped, as though the hand refuses to forget, as though memory itself is bound into tissue. And the feet they carry the longest inscription of all. Heels cracked like parched earth soles, thickened fissures spreading like the webbing of an old mosaic. The city's stones mirrored in the very feet that tread upon them. He is marked by the ground as surely as the ground is marked by him, and the exchange continues, day after day, imprint upon imprint, until flesh and stone remember one another with equal intimacy. These marks are not random, not meaningless. They are deliberate in their repetition, systematic in their return, ritualistic in their insistence. And in that rhythm they become a liturgy of pain, silent yet enduring, unspoken yet declaring. Every bruise tells, every ache remembers, every silence endures. To an outsider, the carrier appears simply worn, his skin battered, his frame tired. But to one who looks closer, to one who listens, the marks reveal themselves as hieroglyphs of labor, a language that cannot be erased, a sacred text of endurance, read only by the gods perhaps, but still valid, still binding. The bruise that swells on the upper arm is not unlike the chisel mark that deepens a column. The rope burn that stings across the wrist is not unlike the groove cut into marble. The cracked heel that bleeds faintly is not unlike the fissure that opens in old stone. And in these parallels, the body shows itself to be Rome's companion text. Fragile where stone is firm, soft where marble is hard, yet carrying within it inscriptions just as binding, perhaps even more so, because flesh forgets slowly but remembers deeply. These are the archives of service no historian writes, the annals of toil no senator recites, the chronicles of endurance no sculptor preserves. Yet they remain, walking through the city in silence, carried not on scrolls but on shoulders, not in ink but in living scar tissue. The people of Rome may not look twice at the carrier's bruised frame, yet the gods, if they see, might recognize in those marks a kind of sacrifice, a litany of wounds offered not on altars but on cobblestones, each bruise a petition, each crack a prayer, each scar a whispered hymn. And when he lies down at night, when he turns on his side and feels the tender ache of shoulder against straw, the body continues its speaking. The marks continue their recitation, and even in dreams the flesh remembers. For memory does not vanish when consciousness sleeps. It is written deeper. It is etched into muscle and sinew. And thus he wakes again already inscribed for the next day, already bearing tomorrow's text before it is even written. He may forget each journey, each step blending into the next, but his body does not forget. It carries the palimpsest of all journeys at once, layered upon each other, scars crossing scars, bruises fading beneath new bruises, lines thickening beneath fresh lines, until the body resembles a manuscript rewritten 1,000 times, blurred but rich, messy but profound, impossible to decipher completely but undeniable in its existence. And in this sense, the carrier is both worker and witness, both tool and archive, both forgotten citizen and living monument. A paradox only Rome could generate, a paradox sustained only by repetition. Every mark tells, every ache remembers, every silence endures. And when the carrier is gone, when his body dissolves into the soil, those marks vanish too, yet in some hidden way they remain, perhaps impressed faintly into the stones he walked upon, perhaps echoed in the memory of water that touched his hands, perhaps held in the gaze of gods who do not forget, so that nothing is ever truly lost, even if no one speaks of it. The breath of the water carrier is the most constant companion of his labor, more faithful than comrades, more steady than thought, more enduring than hope. For breath is the invisible thread that binds every motion together, the silent metronome that counts without numbers, the rhythm that carries him from fountain to household, from morning to night, from strength to weariness. Each inhalation is a taking in of the world, a drawing of air, heavy with the smell of wet stone, with the musk of bodies pressed together in alleyways, with the faint sweetness of figs ripening in baskets, and each exhalation is a giving back, a surrender of self, a small offering of warmth cast into the cool air of dawn or the dry heat of noon. And thus the body participates in a cycle as vast as Rome itself. The city inhaling when its markets surge alive with cries and laughter, exhaling when its sewers sigh unseen beneath the ground, inhaling when senators argue in the forum, exhaling when slaves groan under burdens in the shadows. The carrier's chest rising and falling like a microcosm of the city's vast respiration. Listen closely to the sound, the faint rasp at the back of the throat, the wind brushing past teeth, the quiet hum of lungs filling, then the whispered release, sometimes even a groan disguised as air, sometimes a hiss of strain, sometimes nothing but the barest sigh, yet always there, steady, endless, like waves breaking unseen upon some distant shore. And breath becomes more than survival, more than necessity. It becomes time itself, a clock without bells, a sundial without shadow, for each inhalation is a beginning, each exhalation a conclusion, and the carrier learns to measure his day not by hours but by cycles of the chest, by how many times he must draw in and release before the jar has reached its destination, by how many breath steps remain before the fountain appears again. In this way, breathing and walking join together, woven into one seamless rhythm. Inhale as the left foot strikes. Exhale as the right follows. Inhale again, exhale again, until step and breath blur into unity. Until his body moves, not by choice, but by cadence, hypnotic in its constancy, a trance of survival that dulls pain yet sharpens awareness. And within that cadence is the mantra unspoken yet always present. Breathe, step, bear, breathe, step, bear, breathe, step, bear, a chant as sacred as any prayer uttered in temple halls, though no priest proclaims it, though no crowd repeats it. Over time, the breath changes, shifting with the slope of the road, with the weight of the jar, with the heat of the day. Shallow when the incline steepens, ragged when the amphora sloshes heavy, slow and deep when evening cool settles on the skin. But always it returns to rhythm, always it seeks its balance again, for breath is both fragile and resilient, both faltering and insistent, and the carrier knows this truth in his bones, that so long as he breathes, he endures, and endurance is survival. Sometimes he notices how his own breath mingles with others, how 2 or 3 carriers walking together fall into a shared pattern, their inhalations overlapping, their exhalations released almost in chorus, and for a brief moment it feels as though they are one body with many limbs, a procession of lungs moving through the city like a single creature. Rome inhaling and exhaling through their collective chests, the empire itself sustained by their invisible cadence, and in the rare moments of stillness, when he sets down the jar to rest, in a new way, the heaving rise of ribs, in the new way, the heaving rise of ribs, the burn in the throat, the desperate grasping for more air, as though it were water itself, and the slow calming that follows, the return to equilibrium, the gratitude for breath once overlooked, for breath once taken for granted, but never truly guaranteed. Breath is the most humble of possessions, the most fleeting of gifts, yet also the most faithful, for while wages may falter, while bodies may break, While names may vanish, breath remains until the very end, counting the measure of each life without error, without pause. And so the water carrier, though he does not speak of it, though he does not dwell on it, lives within this truth, that he is not merely carrying water, he is carrying breath upon breath, each one sustaining not only himself, but the unseen web of the city. For the water he delivers allows others to breathe easier, to live longer, to laugh louder, and thus his own breath, though invisible, is mirrored in theirs. And so the rhythm continues, steady, endless, hypnotic. Breathe, step, bear, breathe, step, bear, breathe, step, bear, until the day ends, until the jar is empty, until the night draws its dark cloak over the city, and he lies down and breathes still, now slower, now gentler, yet always part of Rome's vast respiration, one chest among thousands, rising and falling beneath the stars. Fatigue arrives not as an enemy, but as an inevitable companion, the shadow that lengthens behind every step, the heaviness that settles into limbs like dusk spreading across the sky. And yet in this weariness there is no shame, for exhaustion is not collapse, but cycle, not an end but a turning, as fields once harvested must lie fallow to gather strength, as soil depleted by grain must rest under sun and rain until it yields again. So too does the water carrier's body know its rhythm of depletion and renewal, of labor and reprieve, for each day drains him, and yet each night, each pause, each morsel of bread and cup of watered wine restores him, reweaves the fibers frayed by burden. His fatigue is both constant and passing, a tide that ebbs and flows, cresting at midday, under the glare of sun, receding slightly when shade grants relief, crashing again in late afternoon when muscles burn, then softening as he lays down his amphora, as he stoops to splash cool water on his face, as he feels sweat mix with the fountain's spray. And in that simple act of washing there is ritual, there is a hint of baptism, a reminder that the body is not condemned to endless decay, but renewed again and again, as if the gods themselves decree that no man may labor forever without reprieve. And so he learns the art of small restorations, the evening bath where grime dissolves into clarity, the brief meal where olives and coarse bread tastes like feasts, because they arrive at the right moment, the stolen nap under a shaded wall, where eyes close just long enough to reset the mind. Preparing him not only for another dawn, but for another measure of meaning in the endless cycle of service. Even in the grandeur of the heavens, this pattern holds true, for the stars themselves fade at daybreak, slipping beneath the veil of light. And so the carrier feels himself aligned with cosmic rhythm, his exhaustion echoing celestial retreat, his renewal echoing celestial return. And in this recognition, fatigue loses its sting, becomes instead a sign of belonging, proof that he too participates in the eternal cycle, that his body, humble though it is, bears the same truth as the firmament. To the passer-by, his weariness may look like defeat, stooped shoulders, dragging feet, half-closed eyes, but within he knows it as preparation, as gestation, for strength is never endless, but always reborn. And tomorrow he will rise with limbs somewhat heavier, but spirit somewhat steadier. For renewal is not about erasing fatigue, but about carrying it forward, woven now into resilience, transformed into a deeper well from which he can draw. Thus, fatigue and renewal are not opposites, but companions, walking side by side, one hand on his shoulder to press him down, the other hand to lift him again, and so the cycle continues, as it does for the soil, for the seasons, for the stars, depletion becoming promise, collapse becoming pause, weariness becoming the quiet ground where renewal germinates. And through this endless dance, the carrier learns the deepest truth of labor, that to give and to tire is not to end, but to open the way for rest, and to rest is not to waste, but to begin again. For everything in Rome, from the vast empire to the humblest man with his jar, must breathe in fatigue and breathe out renewal, until one day breath itself ceases. And even then, perhaps, the cycle continues in forms unseen. The body, though it aches and bends, though it wears its bruises like dark flowers and its calluses like rough mosaics, is never only flesh, never merely muscle and bone, for in the act of carrying water, it becomes something beyond itself. It becomes vessel, memory, and cosmos, all at once. A paradox in motion, frail yet enduring, anonymous yet essential, forgotten by the crowd, yet indispensable to its survival. And so, as the carrier moves through Rome, amphora, balanced against skin, he becomes more than man. He becomes a conduit of the city itself, as if his veins are threads tying cistern to household, fountain to hearth, aqueduct to cup. His body is Rome's unspoken architecture, each step reinforcing its rhythm, each breath aligning with its pulse. And though no statue will ever be raised in his likeness, his labor is engraved, invisibly in the survival of others, as necessary as the marble columns, yet uncarved in history's memory. There is humility in this paradox, but also sublimity, for to live as both overlooked and essential is to occupy a threshold between worlds, the visible and the hidden, the celebrated and the ignored, the fleeting and the eternal. In this sense, his body is not only his own, it belongs to Rome, to its streets, to its fountains, to its countless thirsty mouths. Each bruise becomes an inscription, not only of pain but of participation, each scar a silent chronicle of service. And beyond Rome, beyond the streets and the markets and the palaces, his body becomes aligned with the cosmos, for the carrying of water is the carrying of life itself. And life is always cosmic, always tethered to the rivers and seas, to the clouds that drift and break, to the rain that falls and renews. The amphora he carries echoes the shape of the womb, echoes the swell of the moon, echoes the curve of the earth itself. And thus, in bearing it, he mimics creation. He becomes participant in the eternal act of giving form to life. The paradox deepens. His body is small, fragile, destined one day to falter, and yet, through his service, he is stretched across centuries. For every drop he carries nourishes another body, and that body nourishes another. And so his anonymous effort ripples forward into time, into generations, unseen into histories never written but lived. And so philosophy takes root in weariness, to know oneself not as a solitary vessel of pain and effort, but as a temple of connection, a shrine where Rome itself worships unknowingly, where gods and mortals both pass in whispers. Your body is not only your own, it is Rome's vessel, Rome's rhythm, Rome's hidden temple. Your body is the arch no one names, but everyone walks beneath. Your body is the aqueduct no poet sings, but every citizen drinks from. Your body is the silent liturgy carried out in streets and courtyards, where no incense burns, but sweat rises. Like offering, where no choir sings, but breath chants in rhythm, where no altar stands, but skin and bone themselves are consecrated by use. Thus the paradox resolves, not by choosing flesh or spirit, but by recognizing both, the body beyond the body, frail and enduring, anonymous and essential, hidden yet holy, forgotten yet eternal. And in this recognition lies peace, to walk heavy yet light, to ache yet belong, to fade yet endure, to die one day in silence, but to have lived as Rome's vessel, Rome's rhythm, Rome's hidden temple. Clay is drawn from the earth, not carelessly, but with reverence. Hands plunging into the soil where moisture lingers, where ancient sediments lie pressed together by centuries of rain and silence. Each handful is heavy, cool, yielding, yet dense with potential. It is not yet vessel, not yet tool, not yet servant of thirst. It is earth, still belonging to itself. Yet, in the moment it is dug, it begins a journey toward form, toward service, toward a life of bearing and giving. The clay remembers the womb of the earth from which it came, remembers the deep weight of silence before the potter touched it. On the wheel, the clay rises, spinning, shaping, the potter's hands coax walls into being. Coax, a hollow where water will one day rest. Coax handles where human hands will grip. Coax a mouth where lips will drink. It is born not through breath, but through pressure and rotation, through calloused fingers that know how much to press and when to let go. It spins and spins, becoming amphora, becoming purpose, becoming future companion of the carrier. In its curve, you can see the curve of the horizon. In its hollow, you can sense the echo of the sea. In its body, you can imagine the body of Rome itself, vast, open, waiting to be filled. Fire seals its shape. In the kiln, the clay glows red, then hardens into permanence. Smoke rises, heat cracks the silence, and when it cools, it is no longer earth but vessel, no longer raw but refined, no longer soil but servant. Painted, sometimes with markings, sometimes left plain. It emerges from fire, the way the soul is said to emerge, purified from trials. The amphora is now ready to enter the world of streets, of markets, of fountains, of hands that will lift it, shoulders that will bear it, lips that will drink from it. At first, it gleams. The clay surface is unbroken, the handles smooth. It sits in rows among others, waiting, each identical, yet destined for its own path, its own service, its own bruises and chips. It is chosen, lifted, filled with water, heavy now, alive, with movement inside, sloshing like a heartbeat. From that first filling, it begins its cycle, carried across cobblestones, balanced against cloth padding on a shoulder. It becomes inseparable from labor. Each step the carrier takes, the amphora sways in rhythm. Each pause at the fountain, it lowers into the basin, opens its mouth to be filled, accepts the weight of water again. It holds, it empties, it holds again, over and over, day after day, year upon year. In markets, it listens. In courtyards, it waits. In kitchens, it rests against walls, half shadowed by the firelight. It becomes part of the background of Rome's life, always there but rarely noticed, always serving but rarely praised. Yet it hears more than any citizen might think. The amphora hears the gossip of women drawing water. Hears the bargaining of merchants. Hears the prayers murmured at dawn. Hears the sighs of those too weary to speak. It is a silent witness, carrying not only liquid but also the invisible breath of the city. And with each journey, it changes. The amphora collects marks, a chip at the lip from being set down too quickly, a scratch along its side from brushing stone walls, darkening stains from the constant embrace of water. Its surface begins to resemble the carrier's body, weathered, scarred, toughened by repetition. Amphora and man age together. Neither complains. Both endure. Both continue their rhythm of carrying, pouring, receiving, emptying. It holds, it empties, it holds again. Inevitably, a moment comes. A crack forms, perhaps along the base, perhaps at the handle. Water seeps where it should not. The carrier notices the drip, the slow betrayal of the vessel's body. At first, it is patched, sealed with resin, wrapped with fiber to hold the fracture closed. The amphora continues, limping, still in service. But cracks widen, and no patch holds forever. One day it breaks fully, dropped on stone, or split by strain, or shattered in the chaos of the street. Its pieces scatter, sharp edges glinting where once there was curve and smoothness. Yet even broken, it does not disappear. Its shards are gathered, sometimes ground into temper for new clay, sometimes used to line drains, sometimes pressed into walls, sometimes scattered in the earth. The amphora returns to fragments, but not to nothing. It transforms. It continues in other forms of service. Just as the body of the water carrier will one day return to the soil, yet live on in memory, in Rome's continuing life, so too the amphora endures in another shape. The cycle of clay is the cycle of existence. Earth to form, form to use, use to fracture, fracture to earth again. The amphora is not only container of water, but also symbol of all that Rome is. Fragile yet enduring, humble yet indispensable, silent yet filled with life. To carry one is to carry a piece of the cosmos, a reminder that all things are vessels, all things are cycles, all things are called to serve and to transform. In the stillness of night, when the amphora rests empty by the fountain, it reflects the starlight in the thin layer of water that clings inside. In that shimmer, the carrier might glimpse both his own reflection and something more. The face of the divine, the whisper of eternity. Amphora and man together mirror the city, mirror the cosmos. One made of clay, one made of flesh, both bearing burdens, both repeating the rhythm of holding and emptying, both destined to break, both destined to return. It holds, it empties, it holds again. The amphora teaches patience, teaches endurance, teaches that no act of service is ever wasted, no cycle ever meaningless. Its life is not grand, not sung in triumphal arches, not carved in marble inscriptions, yet it is indispensable, woven into the quiet fabric of Rome's survival. And perhaps, in its silence, it teaches more than monuments ever could, that to serve, to endure, to be carried, and to carry in turn, is itself a form of eternity. From the forests comes the wood, tall trees felled by axes, their rings whispering of years of rain and wind, of sun filtering through leaves. A trunk is split, planed, shaped, cut down not to serve itself, but to serve others. In the hands of the carpenter, the raw beam is carved into length, edges softened, surfaces smoothed, a curve made to rest upon living shoulders. Thus the yoke is born, not as ornament, but as tool, as companion to labor, as mediator between body and burden. What was once rooted in earth becomes an instrument of carrying, destined to lie across flesh. When first lifted, the yoke feels strange. Wood and body are not yet acquainted. The shoulders flinch against the press of grain. The collarbone feels the weight unyielding. The wood is stiff, the body tender, but repetition teaches intimacy. Over days, over months, the shoulders mold themselves to the yoke, and the yoke takes on the memory of the body. Sweat seeps into its grain. Oil from skin darkens its surface. Grooves deepen where ropes bite. It is not simply an object. It becomes half of a partnership, half of a rhythm, half of a shared endurance. Balanced across the shoulders, the yoke spreads the load. Without it, the amphora's ropes cut sharply into flesh. Weight digging cruelly into one side, twisting spine, grinding muscle into bone. With it, the burden is evened. The wood takes part of the pain, distributes the heaviness across collar and back. It does not erase the weight, but translates it, teaching the body to move differently, more steadily, more rhythmically. In this way, the yoke is equalizer, not savior. It lessens nothing, but it balances everything. And yet balance leaves marks. The yoke presses the same spot again and again, imprinting itself on the skin. A thickened line forms along the shoulders, toughened flesh where once it was soft. Bruises darken, then fade into callus, into permanent ridges of labor. Wood engraves body, body engraves wood. Each learns the other. The yoke remembers its carrier in smell, in sweat, in wear. The carrier remembers the yoke in ache, in scar, in posture. They cannot be separated without residue. Carrying becomes a cadence. Lean, lift, balance, lean, lift, balance. Each step takes the weight from one leg to the other. Each sway shifts the yoke slightly. Each pause lets the shoulders breathe. It is not chaotic. It is not random. It is rhythm, as steady as a chant, as constant as a drum. The yoke teaches the carrier a language of movement that can only be learned by repetition, a prayer without words, spoken by muscle and bone. Sometimes, under sun, the wood grows hot, searing against bare skin. Sometimes, in rain, it grows slick, sliding, demanding tighter grip. Sometimes, in cold, it feels like iron, unyielding, biting through cloth. The yoke is always there, changing with weather, yet constant in its function. It adapts as the carrier adapts. Together they form a moving architecture. Body, wood, amphora, water, an ensemble in motion. Bound by necessity, bound by rhythm. The yoke is a paradox. It lightens and it burdens. It saves the shoulders from rope burns, yet it engraves deeper, wider marks of its own. It makes the carrying possible, but also unavoidable. Without the yoke, the amphora might not be born at all. With it, the burden becomes daily law, inescapable rhythm. Thus, the yoke is not only tool, but symbol of obligation. It says, "This is your work, this is your rhythm, this is your role. You lean, you lift, you balance, again and again, without end." And yet, in its simplicity lies wisdom. The yoke shows that strength is not brute force, but distribution. That balance is more enduring than resistance. That the body and the burden are not enemies, but partners, bound through the wood between them. The yoke does not fight gravity, it negotiates with it. The carrier does not defy weight, he shares it with his shoulders, his breath, his steps, lean, lift, balance. In this way, the yoke becomes intimate, almost sacred, not worshipped, not adorned, but lived with so closely that it becomes invisible, like breath. Without it, the carrier feels naked, incomplete, unready. With it, he knows the day can unfold. He knows the amphora will rest against its arms, the ropes will hold, the weight will settle evenly, and his body will enter its known rhythm. Man and yoke become extensions of each other, two beings fused by labor into a single moving form. The yoke outlasts flesh. One carrier passes, another takes it up. It absorbs the sweat of generations, the oil of countless shoulders. It becomes darker with time, smoother with touch, worn with years of service. It remembers bodies long gone, remembers their cadence, remembers their rhythm. The yoke is thus not only wood but memory, not only tool but inheritance. To lift it is to enter into continuity, into the lineage of those who bore before you. And so the yoke is more than beam across shoulders. It is law, rhythm, partner, scar, inheritance. It teaches without speaking. It marks without cruelty. It balances without erasing. In its silence, it tells the truth of labor, that no burden is carried alone, that weight can be transformed but never abolished, that the body adapts not by resisting but by learning, by listening, by yielding. Lean, lift, balance, lean, lift, balance. With each repetition, body and yoke write their story upon each other. A story that belongs not to monuments or marble, but to shoulders, to scars, to wood worn smooth by time. Before the jar is lifted, before the yoke is balanced, before the step is taken, there are ropes, twisted from coarse hemp, from plant fibers, harvested, dried, combed, spun into strands, then braided together into cord. They begin as green stalks in a field, as leaves swaying in the wind. But in human hands they become binding, fastening, holding. Hemp becomes rope, and rope becomes law. For without it, nothing is carried, nothing is secured, nothing is bound. Touch it, and the skin recoils. The fibers are rough, biting into palm and shoulder, stiff when dry, swollen when damp. Against flesh, the rope rubs, scrapes, burns. Over time, the skin thickens, the nerves grow used to its bite. Yet the memory of the first sting never vanishes. Rope teaches the body, not in words, but in fire, etching its lesson with every tightening knot. The smell is unmistakable, earthy, pungent, like soil mixed with oil, like dried grass pressed too long in the sun. When wet, it carries a rank sweetness, heavy and clinging, rising from the shoulder where sweat soaks into it. Carriers know the scent not as strangers but as kin, a constant perfume of labor. And the sound, it speaks even when unseen. Pull it taut and it creaks, fibers grinding against fibers. Knot it tight and it groans. Stretch it under weight and it hums faintly, a low song of strain. To the practiced ear, these sounds are warnings, signals, companions. A sharp snap, and the amphora may tumble, shattering. A steady creak, and the burden is secure. The rhythm may continue. The rope has a voice, and laborers learn to listen. Rope is helper. It holds the amphora fast, steadies the load against sway, allows the weight to be distributed across wood and body. Without rope, the vessel would slip, the burden scatter, the labor fail. It is the unseen partner, the quiet engineer of carrying. But rope is also tormentor. It bites, it burns, it leaves its mark. The skin beneath the shoulder reddens, darkens, blisters. Across the chest, narrow welts rise like inscriptions, thin red lines that speak of service. The rope does not let go easily. It clings, tightens, digs deeper with every shift of weight. The body learns to fear its touch as much as to rely upon it. Thus, rope is both friend and enemy, salvation and punishment. Without it, nothing is born. With it, flesh is torn. This paradox lies at the heart of all labor. The tool that enables is the tool that scars. The bond that supports is the bond that binds. The rope is both mercy and chain. Carrying becomes a rhythm marked by rope. Fingers knot, shoulders adjust, skin braces against its bite. The cadence is constant. Pull, bind, bear, pull, bind, bear. The words echo not in speech but in action, in each amphora secured, in each step taken beneath its hold. Rope teaches ritual, the knot tied the same way every day, the amphora lashed in familiar pattern, the burden bound into the same configuration again and again. The hands remember before the mind does. The rope carries not only the vessel but also the memory of gesture. Sometimes rope frays, fibers unravel, edges split, strands loosen into wild hair. Carriers know this sight as omen, as danger. Frayed rope is betrayal waiting to happen. A single snapped thread becomes two, becomes many, until weight breaks through. Vessel crashes, water spills. So the rope must be tended, rebraided, reinforced. Just as the body needs rest, the rope needs repair. Flesh heals, fiber frays. Both are reminders of impermanence, of the ceaseless need for renewal. Ropes are humble, unnoticed, rarely sung of in marble or bronze. Yet without them, no amphora reaches the market, no water arrives at the fountain, no load is carried from dock to street. They are the invisible sinews of the city, binding together commerce and sustenance, work and survival. Just as tendons hold bone to muscle, ropes hold vessel to body. Without tendons, flesh collapses. Without rope, labor collapses. And so rope is mirror. The strands are like lives, twisted together, weak alone, strong in union. One fiber cannot bear much, but many braided can hold a city's thirst. Carriers see themselves in this, alone, fragile, breakable, but together woven into endurance. The rope is not just rope. It is the image of community, of shared labor, of strength through binding. Each mark it leaves upon the body is testimony. A thin scar across the chest, a callus on the palm, a welt on the shoulder. These are not accidents, but records. In them, the rope writes its story upon flesh, just as inscriptions are carved upon stone. Rope's letters are read and raised, fading only slowly, returning always anew. The body becomes parchment, the rope becomes stylus, the burden becomes ink. And through this script, laborers carry not only water but memory. Every line tells of weight endured, every blister of distance crossed, every scar of service given. The rope, like the city, leaves nothing untouched, nothing unmarked. Flesh becomes history, each carrier a living tablet. Pull, bind, bear, pull, bind, bear. The chant continues, not just for one man, but for thousands, across years, across lifetimes. The rope is remade, replaced, yet always the same. The hands that knot it change, the shoulders that bear it fade, but the fibers twist anew, the cadence begins again. Rope teaches that nothing is permanent, yet nothing is lost. The cycle binds forever. In its silence, the rope whispers wisdom, that what binds can both free and wound, that strength lies in weaving, that endurance is not the absence of pain, but the carrying of it, with rhythm, with ritual, with breath. Pull, bind, bear, pull, bind, bear, bear. With each knot, each mark, each fray, rope and body compose their endless song of labor. They stand quietly in corners, lined along walls, clustered at fountains, resting in shadows of kitchens. Amphorae, tall and slender, clay bodies shaped to hold, to carry, to pour. They are not only vessels of water, wine, oil. They are vessels of memory, for though they cannot speak, they listen. Though they cannot walk, they travel. Though they cannot write, they record. And so, in silence, amphorae become witnesses. In markets, they are never alone. Rows of them, mouths open, bellies rounded, wait while voices wash over them like tide. They hear bargaining and laughter, arguments sharp and cutting, gossip whispered low. A woman leans close to another and shares a rumor. The amphora nearby absorbs the words, holding them as it holds liquid. It remembers the tone, even if the lips forget. A merchant curses his rival, another boasts of profit, another prays for fortune. The amphorae hear it all. They are not blind jars, they are listening posts. In homes, they sit beside hearths, against walls, tucked into alcoves. They watch families eat, quarrel, embrace. They hear sighs of fatigue after labor, hear lullabies sung to children, hear secrets shared in candlelight. Their rounded bellies echo faintly when struck, as though responding, as though acknowledging. When water is poured from them into cups, they listen to the clink of pottery, to the murmured blessing before a meal. When emptied, they wait in patience, knowing they will be filled again. They endure as houses crumble, as generations pass, as lives rise and fade. The amphora remains, a silent companion to mortality. At fountains, they gather in clusters, leaning against one another, resting on stone ledges. There they hear the most, women speaking while filling them, children shouting and splashing, old men mumbling as they dip cups. Fountains are theaters of life, and amphorae are always in the front row. They hear whispered confessions carried on steam of morning breath. They hear laughter rising like spray. They hear prayers offered in secret as water trickles into clay. They stand attentive, listening. But amphorae are not merely listeners. They are rememberers. Their clay holds sound the way it holds water, absorbing, containing, preserving. The jar remembers what the lips forget. It remembers the joy that was quickly spoken and quickly lost. It remembers the sorrow uttered once, then buried. It remembers promises, lies, confessions, jokes. Though no one asks it, the amphora keeps the record, faithful, uncomplaining. Sometimes they bear witness to more than words. In the corner of a tavern, an amphora sees the unsteady hand that pours too much wine, hears the song that turns to weeping, feels the blow of a fist struck against its side in anger. In the quiet of a bedroom, an amphora holds oil while bodies move in shadows, while whispers rise and fall. In the courtyard of a temple, an amphora holds sacred water while chants surround it. Incense thickens the air and vows are sworn. They see, they hear, they endure. And when they break, when the amphora is chipped, cracked, shattered, it is not only clay that is lost, it is memory spilling onto earth. A fragment buried in soil keeps its silence for centuries, remembering long after all voices have stilled. Archaeologists lift such fragments and wonder what they carried, what they heard, what they saw. The shard does not answer, but it remembers. Always it remembers. Yet, across centuries, through earth and ruin, its fragments persist, whispering of the life that once surrounded it. In this way, the amphora is like the human body, frail in the moment, eternal in trace. A man dies, but his bones endure. An amphora shatters, but its shards endure. Both are witnesses, silent, incorruptible. To imagine the perspective of the amphora is to imagine patience. It does not hurry, it does not resist. It simply holds, listens, waits. It endures gossip as easily as prayer, laughter as easily as lament. It is impartial. It does not judge the worth of what it hears. It remembers everything, equally, endlessly. The jar remembers what the lips forget. Perhaps this is why amphor seem to radiate presence even when empty. Their stillness is not vacancy, but fullness of memory. Their silence is not absence, but containment. To stand among them is to feel surrounded by echoes of unspoken history, 1,000 conversations lingering in clay. One could almost press an ear to their sides and imagine hearing the murmur of ancient voices, like seashells carrying ocean's roar. In them, the city itself breathes. Its markets chatter within them. Its homes sigh within them. Its fountains murmur within them. Rome speaks, and amphorae listen. Rome moves, and amphorae endure. They are vessels of both sustenance and remembrance, shaping daily life while preserving invisible record. And so they stand, lined against walls, clustered at fountains, resting in kitchens, clay molded by hand, fired by flame, painted by brush. They serve until chipped, until cracked, until broken. Yet even then they remain in fragments, in memory, in silence. For, though amphorae cannot speak, they have heard more than most. Though they cannot write, they have recorded what no scroll could hold. They are the city's hidden witnesses, guardians of the unspoken, listeners of the forgotten, and always, always, their silent motif. The jar remembers what the lips forget. The body is never alone, even in its weariness, even in its labor, even when sweat runs like rain and breath rasps like wind through reeds. It is not solitary. Always there is companionship. The carrier walks not as a singular figure, but as a constellation, flesh and clay, bone and wood, skin and fiber, earth and breath. The yoke across the shoulders leaves its trace, not only in aching flesh, but in the way the body learns to balance, the way the gait adjusts, the way strength finds rhythm. The wood presses in, but it also supports. It digs into muscle, but it also spreads the burden. Over days and years, the body and the beam learn each other. Shoulder hardens to groove, groove deepens to shoulder. Companion, not stranger, the amphora too is no mere object. Its clay belly curves against hip and palm. Its cool surface sweats with condensation in the morning. The hand learns its contour, the tilt of its lip, the balance of its weight when half full or brimming. And in turn, the amphora learns the hand, the press of fingers, the warmth of skin. Together, body and jar move, breathe, carry. Without the one, the other is empty. Without the other, the one is overwhelmed. And the rope, twisted fiber, coarse hemp, bites into palm, into shoulder. It burns, it frays, it creaks. Yet it binds loads, secures vessels, steadies the shaking. Its roughness teaches the hand patience. Its tension teaches the arm endurance. And in return, the hand gives it purpose, gives it meaning, gives it life. A rope without hand is nothing but abandoned fiber. A hand without rope cannot carry all it must. Companionship again. It sloshes in rhythm with step, cool cool against the jar, living within clay until poured. It quenches thirst, it cleanses skin, it cooks grain. The body bears it, yes, but the body also needs it, is made of it, becomes it. The water carried is the water within, carrier and carried, inseparable. So the carrier is never alone. The tools are not foreign intrusions, but extensions of flesh, continuations of body, echoes of earth. The yoke is the arm stretched into wood. The amphora is the belly of clay, mirroring the belly of flesh. The rope is sinew, externalized, fiber twisted like tendon. The water is blood, outside the veins. Human and tool, human and earth, human and cosmos, all braided together, inseparable. It is easy to think of labor as solitary, as the burden of one back, one body. But in truth, work is born together. The wood helps, the clay helps, the rope helps, the water helps. Each has its weight, each has its pain, each has its gift. Together, they make possible what alone would be impossible. Together, they weave a companionship that is quiet, faithful, unbroken. And perhaps this is why the marks of labor, callus, groove, scar, do not only tell of suffering, but of relationship. The body remembers its companions, the shoulder remembers the yoke, the hand remembers the amphora, the palm remembers the rope, the lips remember the cool water. These memories are not words, not stories, not songs, but they are deeper, etched into muscle and bone. They are the body's gratitude, unspoken but felt, for the tools are not enemies, though they hurt. They are not strangers, though they remain silent. They are not inert, though they seem lifeless. They are companions, always present, always returning, always bearing with the one who bears them. In the silence of labor, companionship speaks. In the ache of muscle, companionship comforts. In the long rhythm of breath and step, companionship endures. And so, the meditation turns to gratitude. Gratitude not loud or triumphant, but quiet, like water poured into a jar, like rope coiling at day's end, like wood resting against the wall after toil. Gratitude that work is never born alone. Gratitude that clay and wood and fiber and water walk with the body, shaping and being shaped, teaching and being taught. Gratitude that in the endless cycle of bearing and being born, the body finds not only fatigue, but fellowship. The amphora remembers what the lips forget. The rope holds what the hands release. The yoke balances what the back cannot. The water renews what the body spends. And the body, in turn, honors them all, by carrying, by using, by enduring, by being shaped. Companionship in silence, companionship in weariness, companionship in the simple act of continuing. And at last, when day fades, when tools are set aside, when the carrier lies down to rest, that companionship lingers. The body is never truly alone, for it has been joined to wood, clay, rope, and water. It has carried them, and they have carried it. Flesh and tool, body and earth, labor and rest, inseparable. The work of Rome is not born by men alone. It is born together, by men, by tools, by earth, by silence. This is the quiet truth, the hidden temple. Work is never solitary. Work is companionship. Work is communion. Work is born together. And in that truth rests a kind of peace, a kind of tenderness, a kind of gratitude that no exhaustion can erase.